right. It is indeed my pleasure to be joining with us today, Dr. Akber Mithani. Akber uncle, Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Muhammad Hussain, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy and, with the pandemic and you being an active physician, I just wanted to take this opportunity on behalf of everyone to, first of all, say thank you to you and to your colleagues for everything that you're doing. It's definitely appreciated, and I hope that you and your family are doing well in these difficult times.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. It is an honor, alhamdulillah. Allah has given us an honor to serve, inshallah, in this pandemic. So we hope that we are able to fulfill that, challenge that He has put in front of us, inshallah, and may He accept all the service in His pleasure, inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah. Once again, thanks again for your time.
Yeah.
And the reason I thought that it was important that, I get squeezed into your busy schedule is, as you know, here in Canada, just a few days ago, it was the National Bell Let's Talk Day, which really encourages everyone to really start talking about mental health. Within our communities, I think it's something that we've now started to do. But in relation to Bell Let's Talk, I didn't really see anything, come out specifically from our Muslim community. And I thought that it would be important that we take that national stage and once again use it to our advantage and really, engage one another in having this discussion. Because, pre-pandemic, it was an issue, mental health. And, if you look at something like anxiety, pre-pandemic, it was affecting about 5% of Canadians. And after the pandemic, so, within, let's say April to October, that number has jumped to 20%. Depression was 4% before and has now risen to about 13%, at least in Canada. And one of the most disturbing numbers is that the Canadian Mental Health Association has reported that 24% of those are between the ages of 18 and 39. So, I definitely didn't want to start this topic in a negative sense, but as you can imagine, there's definitely some issues that are affecting, the community as a whole. And the reason why I wanted to speak to you is you have a very unique perspective, because not only are you a physician in the Fraser Health region here in Vancouver, but you're also a spiritual guide where you've had the opportunity to visit a number of communities, not only within North America, but around the world. And so you have seen the impacts of mental health within our communities. So you have a medical perspective of mental health, but then you also have a perspective of it within our own communities. And that's something that, we just don't really have a lot of data on. I actually found something within 2019 that showed that 63% of Muslims surveyed, and this was specifically on the youth though, that 63% of those surveyed in 2019 suffered from anxiety. And that's a really troubling stat within our Muslim community. So I just wanted to open up the discussion, Dr. Mithani, by really assessing and better understanding what the true landscape of mental health within our Muslim communities is. So, are you able to just elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah. I think, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I think that you bring up some important statistics. I think one of the things that you have to remember is that when you're looking at mental health, and especially in context of the pandemic, one of the things you have to understand is you have to separate mental health and mental well-being from mental illness. Okay, so these are two different things. So when you give the statistics, for example, around anxiety and so on and so forth, that doesn't necessarily mean that statistic means that 63% of Muslims have an anxiety disorder or an anxiety or a depressive disorder. So one of the things that we fail to understand sometimes is that when you are faced with a challenge, whether it's the pandemic or whether it is a personal challenge, you lose your job, and a lot of people have lost their jobs in the pandemic, right? You're at home. Amongst the Muslim population, the cases, we know that the cases of abuse, have gone up significantly during the pandemic. And we'll come to that a little bit as to what are the underlying issues with respect to those kind of challenges. But I think when you're faced with this kind of a pandemic, you're faced with a challenge, then it is a natural reaction to have anxiety. It's a natural response to be anxious. When you're isolated, your mood will go down, especially if you're in the winter and you can't go out and you don't want to go for a walk and it's raining or it's snowing. You are locked down in your house. And you feel that there is a very important disconnect in your life between there's a social disconnect because you are now not interacting socially. People working from home, right? How many people do we know now who are working from home? They don't go to their office, they don't go to their workplace, they don't wake up in the morning. People just put on a shirt and then, and they have pajamas, wearing pajamas, and they put on their shirt, right? Because they're on a Zoom call, for example. But otherwise they're working from home. So there is a social disconnect that leads to, a feeling of uneasiness, a feeling of anxiety, uncertainty. There is fear, am I going to get the virus? And I have parents and grandparents, and what if they get it? And then we are so interconnected with social media platforms and so on and so forth. So we hear all of this news at our fingertip. This guy got COVID, this guy passed away, this guy. And so it creates that fear, it creates that anxiety within a person. And because you are physically locked down and you don't have this social interaction, you have social lockdown, what it also creates is a frustration, right? It's a frustration, anger, and then what happens is invariably it falls onto your family, and the family dynamics start to change because of the emotions that you're feeling, your spouse is feeling, your kids are at home, the university is online, so it creates a lot of that environment where it's the perfect environment for, somebody having a mental health challenge, right? And the other thing, of course, is that we don't realize sometimes that the fact that we're not able to engage in a community, a communal, even, a religious organized event, a congregational event where you meet other people, you worship together, you pray together, you interact together. It also creates a spiritual lockdown for you. And I have heard so many people say to us that, I'm just not connected spiritually. I'm at home and sure, I have, access to, 1,000 YouTube lectures that I could, potentially look at. But it's not the same, and the discipline is not there, to listen to lectures. The concentration is not there. The focus is not there. And in all this environment, you feel actually spiritually disconnected as well. So a lot of people, face these challenges, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a mental illness, okay? A mental illness is something different. And so you want to be able to distinguish these two, right? One is that these challenges that create fear, that create uncertainty, that create isolation, that create anxiety, may be actually a trigger for somebody who already is predisposed to an underlying mental illness.
Or someone who's showing those early signs, they can actually make their mental illness even worse.
Or be exposed.
Right.
So there are people who may have a underlying predisposition to a mental illness, but it may never be exposed in their life because their environment may be such that it's never exposed, right? But this creates an environment where somebody who's already predisposed to an underlying mental illness, they actually end up manifesting that mental illness. And then it becomes very serious. Because for me, you need to distinguish between mental illness and mental health challenge, mental well-being. Those are two separate issues.
No, and understood. And I guess the biggest issue that our communities are facing right now is that, we're no longer getting together. And, our biggest advantage is that we were able to socially get together somehow, some way, whether it was at the center, whether it was through spiritual, whether it was through sports, whether it was. And the science tells us, that whether you're dealing with anxiety issues or depression or what have you, that social interaction, is massive to lowering those symptoms and slowly trying to develop a good routine where you can recover. But we don't have that right now. And so all of those issues that may have been, predisposed before are now actually coming to the surface now. And we're no longer there as a support to everybody else because now we are all having to be socially isolated from one another. So before we get, to what we can do from an individual standpoint and from a community standpoint in these tough times, from your research and from the work that you have done, what are the 3 areas that you feel are the most prevalent in our communities right now? Is it depression? Is it anxiety? What are the main ones from a mental perspective that you're seeing, so that way as we develop our discussion, we can figure out what those solutions are for those specific areas that our communities are really struggling with right now?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think I'm exposed to people trying to connect with me from across the world. So it sort of varies depending on which area you come from.
Sure.
And the challenges are a little bit different depending on which area you are actually coming from. But during, if you're asking me during this pandemic, what are the 3 areas of prevalent areas of mental challenges, then I would say, yes, I think depression, is certainly very high on the list. And I have now started to see, as I've mentioned to you before, this state has actually triggered an underlying, true depressive illness, which I think, which is a medical illness in some people. So when I say depression, I just don't mean people feeling down or having the blues. Many of our people are having full-blown depressions, as I said, because they were predisposed to it, and this environment has triggered it, and it has now exposed it. The other one, of course, is anxiety. Anxiety is very big because of the fear, because of the uncertainty, because of losing your job, because of losing a loved one in your family to this illness, to this pandemic. So depression and anxiety are definitely very, very big, I think, in our community. The other thing that I would say to you, and I don't know if you can, say this is a mental illness or if it's a mental challenge or not. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we have experienced is some very serious issues with family. And my particular concern is around spousal abuse and other kinds of abuse with children and so on and so forth, as a result of, frustration, anger, being kind of sort of locked up at home and so on and so forth. But I also think that that's very culturally based. So there
are you talking domestic abuse then specifically?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to touch on that a little bit more, just because I'm hoping that, some of our youth will also gain some perspective on this particular topic. And since we're on the topic of abuse, I did want to touch on, issues in relation to substance abuse. Yes. And I'm talking specifically about alcohol and drug abuse. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is they're often associated with coping mechanisms. So, when we're feeling down or we're depressed or we're feeling anxious, we want to go and get the quickest fix to make us feel a little bit better. And because we're now socially isolated and we don't have, let's say, that social support, as we sometimes would lean on a little bit more than today, that's a very easy way for us to feel a little bit better. For some, it's food, and some it's drugs. And if we take a look at, let's say, Canada, for example, if we take a look at the overall population, cannabis use is up, but those who were using cannabis before the pandemic, their particular use of cannabis has gone up by 34%, right? So people who are using it more are using it even more now. And so are you able to touch on the fact, and I know this is not a topic that we like to talk about, and perhaps we need to do a little bit more of a better job. And maybe you can be blunt in saying, Akbar, do we have a substance abuse issue in our communities as a coping mechanism? Okay, as a coping mechanism?
Yes, there's no question.
Okay.
In Muharram, I remember that I had a couple of majlises that I did on addictions, actually. I hope we get a chance at some point to talk about addictions, because I think this is very prevalent in our community. So let's just expand that for a minute.
Okay.
So let me tell you what the issues are.
Sure.
So the underlying sort of driver or trigger for this, right? I mean, if you want to talk from a biochemical perspective, right? It's that dopamine trigger, right? Yes. Where it's your brain. There is a pleasure center in your brain, right? That you are trying to activate because of the fact that you have been surrounded by so much negativity. And as you just said, it's about trying to look at coping mechanisms. It's trying to look at having a crutch, going to something because it's just so overwhelming. The fear is so much. And so the people who already have an issue with substance, for example, you're absolutely right. The use of that substance has gone up exponentially because now you're at home and there is no other out, right? There is no other way where you can see yourself, coping, socially interacting with friends, family, at work,
sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Mithani, but if we can just take one step back, right? And if we can look at, let's say, pre-pandemic, so we obviously know that during the pandemic, that has gone worse. But if you can, let's say, take a step back and let's say look at pre-pandemic, what were the triggers that caused those coping mechanisms to be put? Is it peer pressure at school? Is it the sheer overload of school? Is it racism? Or is it the depression and the anxiety and things like that, which are all part and parcel of the examples that I gave. But is there anything specific going on with our communities that cause that? And perhaps I'll give you an example. And one of the examples that comes to mind is, whether we like it or not, our communities do deal with gender identity issues. And with our spirituality, and I definitely don't want to get into the discussion of right or wrong from a religious perspective, but at the end of the day, there are those issues. And from a spirituality standpoint, those who struggle with that then go towards those particular coping mechanisms, perhaps. And so from your I guess research and from your experience within these communities, has there been any particular drivers that have caused for the use of these coping mechanisms?
So let me answer your question in a different way.
Sure.
Than the way you have asked. The drivers and the triggers are prevalent, and they are exactly what you've just mentioned. There are so many different drivers depending on what age and what population you're looking for.
So you're not saying, you don't think that there's anything in particular within our communities?
So let me answer this in a different way.
Okay.
So the drivers are always going to be there. The temptations are always going to be there, because your brain is always going to want to look for something that's going to give it pleasure. And as soon as it is allowed to do that, then it's a spiral of toxicity that you go through, right? Mm-hmm. So basically, then you want to do it again, and then you want to do it again, and then one, it's not enough, and then you have to increase it, and so on and so forth. And it spreads outside, not just to substance abuse. It spreads to many different vices. It spreads to things like pornography. It spreads in many different ways. It's all the same thing.
Yeah.
It's triggering that brain center. Mm-hmm. In our communities, the reason that we have this is my opinion, okay? And if you ask me, well, do you have any studies? Then I will say to you, I don't, because we haven't studied the Muslim population.
That's the unfortunate part.
But I can tell you from my experience, the one of the major issues is there are two major issues that drive this in our community. One is the absolute disconnection from a spiritual perspective. We have disconnected our youth, our population spiritually in a meaningful way. We're very good at rituals, but we're not very good at spirituality, right? We're very good at rituals, but we're not very good at spirituality. Meaningful spiritual connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is something that is missing. The other part that is missing is a community support system. The community support system is not there. By and large, a lot of our communities are very judgmental when it comes to these issues. And there is stigma, there is taboo attached to it. And so we would rather put this under the rug. We do not want to face this issue and this challenge head on, because it takes a lot of effort. It really takes a lot of effort, and it takes an organized strategy with appropriate expertise and resources and so on and so forth to really target people who are struggling with addictions, who are struggling with, some of these vices that they are going through. So whilst I think the original triggers are not any different than what you would find in any other society. For our society, for our communities, the thing that drives a believer towards this is because there isn't an organized system that we have created from a community perspective. And what we have done is we have not addressed really the spiritual needs of our members of our communities.
Okay, so I do want to get back to that, but just one quick question is, and this is once again to the predisposition of our communities in general,
Yeah.
and some of these triggers. Do you think that from a genetic standpoint that our communities, whether it be Indo-Pak or from Africa, genetically are predisposed to depression more so than anybody else?
Yes, there is some evidence that certain ethnicities are more disposed to depression and anxiety. So, the South Asian ethnicities are one of the ethnic groups who have a higher incidence of depression and anxiety, but they also have the higher rates of people who are not recognized as having depression and anxiety. And that's because, you see, we have a lot of barriers, right? A lot of barriers that stem from stigma about mental health and mental illness within the Muslim community especially. And, Muslims sometimes, they interpret mental health symptoms as a curse, right? As a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you'll get all kinds of, things, especially in the South Asian community, you'll get, the whole thing about jinn, and this is a curse, and this is a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes they don't want to talk about this, and they don't want to get help because they consider they consider getting help as a sign of spiritual weakness. Why? Because we have created that environment for them, right? We have judged them in that way as a community. So they now say, well, if I'm suffering from these emotional problems, emotional issues, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, it means I'm spiritually weak. And sometimes what happens is even, I would say that, sometimes even some of the scholars, will not understand this area. If somebody is having, let's say, suicidal thoughts or thoughts about harming themselves, then, they will, sometimes make comments about that state of that person that's saying that, well, if you're going to have these thoughts, that it means, you don't really, believe in God and you're going to go to hell. And that's those kinds of negative comments come out. And that actually plunges that person deeper into a depression because now they don't feel an out. They don't feel that there is anybody within their community, especially the Muslim community, who's wanting to listen to them, who wants to have a discussion with them. So that's one of the things that happens.
Okay, so you've opened that box. So now let's dissect it, Akber Uncle, Dr. Mithani, in a little bit more detail. Okay, so you talked about community support system, and there was one study that I read specifically that was done with spiritual leaders or alims within Muslim communities. And that study said that alims, or spiritual guides of communities, of all Muslims, spent close to 50% of their time dealing with mental health related concerns from their membership. And I found that very interesting. And it ties into your perspective as to when people feel as though they have these, this depression or this anxiety or suicidal thoughts, that they're not close to God. And so when you have those feelings, who are you going to speak to? You're going to speak to your community's alim, who is the so-called expert of your community when it comes to spirituality. And one thing that I first want to say that I think alim's perspectives are important, and I know that their heart is in the right place when they're talking to their communities. And I think that it's great that lately, I would say, within the last 2 to 3 years, that alims are speaking about mental health, from the pulpit with a little bit more regularity. But what I have found comical as to what they say is that, look, like, if you're having these thoughts, you're not close enough to God, and that's a sign. And at the end of the day, they're like, you're never alone, because God is always there. And so if you're feeling as though you're alone, that means you're not close enough to God. And so when someone hears that, they may not want to go back to an alim and seek further counsel, because they feel worse after that they're not adequate from a spiritual perspective. And I feel even though alims may want to help their membership, and I'm being very thoughtful with my words, is that sometimes, even though their heart is in the right place, they're saying the wrong things. So as a physician and as a person who's spoken from the pulpit in a variety of different communities, what is your advice to alims as to how they need to handle mental health related issues in their communities with a little bit more proactiveness and a little bit more sensitivity towards these issues?
So this is exactly what I mean when I say creating mental health systems. Like when I talk about community support systems, this is exactly what I mean.
So do you mean like we have places like, for example, like Nasiha, right? And we've got these centers, and if you're having suicidal thoughts or mental health related issues or whatever, you can. Are you talking about within actual communities, or are you talking about more of these types of mental health related centers within communities?
I think it will depend on where you are. I think that, if you look at a community, for example, size of Vancouver, they could create a very organized community mental health support system within the community that could serve the Lower Mainland very easily. But let me explain to you what I mean by this, right? So, I agree with you. I think that, the intention of the imam or the, Islamic scholar who's serving a community is good. I mean, their intention is very good. I mean, they want to provide support to their community members. But I think we need to recognize one thing, is that many of them, and there are some exceptions. Okay, I will tell you, there are some exceptions, and we have actually an exception in our own community, even in Vancouver. But there are some exceptions. But by and large, most of the spiritual scholars and imams or alims that we have in our communities do not have the education nor the training to deal with mental health illness and mental health issues and counseling and so on and so forth.
So what type of education or training do you think that they need?
There is quite extensive training that they would need, and these are offered at the level of the university. There are courses. You can become a counselor. You can look at psychosocial rehabilitation. There are many things that you can do in order to train yourself in making sure that you have that training in order to provide counseling, in order to provide that level of service when people are coming to you.
So if they don't have that training, right, then what is your advice to alims where someone does come to them
So this is what I mean by creating a mental health system, right? So what I mean is it's an interdisciplinary system that you create, an interdisciplinary support system, where you are recognizing that I am an alim and I am going to bring certain things to the table, which are going to be very important, in managing and helping and supporting and nurturing this individual who's going through this mental health challenge. But then it is important that, that you also bring other members of the community who are experts in the other fields.
Okay, so I just want to touch on that. Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Mithani, but I want to touch on that because this is where part of the stigma poses an issue. Okay, so I hear alims talking about we need more counselors in our communities, to help our communities with the mental health challenges that they may be facing. And while this is 100% true, I feel as though that these professionals we need them in our communities to provide the community at large education. Okay? Now, if there is a counselor within the community, with the stigma that we all have within our communities, they're not going to tell their personal mental health challenges to someone who is within the community for the fear of being judged, for the fear that people within that community will find out that they've seen that community member. So that's not going to happen in right now because the stigma hasn't been broken yet, and so while I can understand where alims and where we need more, I would say that needs to start more from an education standpoint, talking about, hey, what, if you're having these symptoms, you need to exercise more, that releases endorphins and make you feel better. You need to have more mindfulness and meditation, thinking about the present instead of the past or the future. You have to continue your being social with one another. Those types of advice that we need from these professionals.
So let me. So I think you're. So let me just. Maybe let me just give you an outline of what I mean when I'm talking about a mental health support system. Okay.
Sure.
So the mental health support system is exactly what you have outlined. In my mind, it has three components to it. Okay. The first component and the most important component, probably four components, but the first and the most important component is education, is awareness, is being able to talk about it. It's getting together as a group and starting to educate people about what this is and to break down those barriers and those taboos, right? To start talking about it, from not just education from a medical perspective, but align it with the fact that we are also spiritual beings, when we are believers, right? And talking about the fact that, Islam is so supportive of people who have mental challenges that it says that if you have mental, illness or incapacity, there are many articles of faith that may be obligatory that you are excused from because of the fact that you are suffering from this type of an illness. And to break down this notion of the fact that if I have a mental challenge and mental illness, it means I'm inadequate. It means I'm spiritually weak. It means that I'm going to go to hell. It means that all of this stuff. So there is this education component, not only education about the illness from the medical perspective, but also how that aligns with the fact that you're now talking to a group of people who are very spiritual and believing Muslims. So that's education is one part of it.
Okay.
The second part of it is to actually provide support and care. right? And the providing of support and care, as I mentioned to you, I think is an interdisciplinary thing. It is recognizing that the alim has a role. It is recognizing that the physician has a role. It's recognizing that the community leader may have a role. It's recognizing that a counselor has a role, a psychologist has a role. It's getting a team together that is able to provide support and care. But not only that, it is also spreading that out so that members of the community are supporting each other in this time. It's very important. It's not just about getting experts together. It's about members of the community, friends, talking to each other without being judgmental. It comes again to education, all right? But it's then, it's easy to give advice, Mohammed Hussein. You need to exercise, it will release endorphins, you need to go out into the sun. But when a person is suffering from depression,
they can't get out of bed.
They just can't, they can't even get out of bed.
So then okay, so that's a good point. So, if you're a friend that knows that, hey, you know what, it doesn't matter what I'm going to say to this person, they can't even get out of bed. They don't want to turn on the lights. They just want to lie in bed and do nothing all day because they can't. What do?
You go and
But you can't right now.
Well, I understand you can't right now, but there are ways that you can, right? Okay. There are family members that can. There are still ways, Mohammed Hussain, I know we are in a lockdown, but if people are suffering, right? And genuinely people have some serious challenges, because when you are in that state where you are just in bed and you're not even getting out, it means you're not eating, you're not drinking, you're not taking your medications. It has an effect on your physical body too. In those situations, people will need to go in, right? And you have to then at some point, figure out, do I connect with the wider system, healthcare system, in order to get this person out of this cycle so that I can be able to provide support to them, right? So you have to do what you have to be able to do. But I think that there are so many people who are not quite at that stage. But if there was just some support for them, if there was just some people who were connecting with them, if they were being shown that, I see your pain, I hear your pain, I feel your, the empathy sort of thing.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I feel it. That has a huge effect.
Okay, so
let me just finish that.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
For a minute. Okay. So I think there is that support and care system. So one is education. The other is the support and the care system, which is interdisciplinary. And I think we have to recognize that, for our members of our community, the alim doesn't have all the answers for you. He's not going to be the plumber, as well as, the physician, as well as reciting majlis and giving you dua kumel and doing this and doing. He's not going to be able to do everything. That's not his area. His area is to move forward and provide those tools, provide those environments, provide that, education, provide that direction, provide that guidance from a spiritual perspective. Absolutely, there's no question about that, right? But there are certain areas that is not the expertise. And so you need to bring them together. You need the group to come together. Education, care support, and the third arm, which I think is very important that we don't pay a lot of attention to, is research. Because we have no data on Muslims and mental illness. And if we were to create a system where we were able to, do some studies, we can then have a deep dive, into some of those core underlying issues that are prevalent in our communities. Remember, a lot of the triggers for these are very culturally based, right? So you look at an Arab culture, you look at a South Asian culture, you look at, a Caucasian culture, there are different drivers that, are impacting, that individual from a culture perspective. We have no studies. We haven't looked at this. We haven't studied it. And because once you do research, it also will allow you in the future to start to look at addressing the core issues and developing interventions that truly address the needs of the community, the mental health needs of the community.
So, I mean, you've touched on a few things, and I definitely do want to try to wrap this up. So, inshallah, if there's lots of leaders of our communities watching this worldwide, if you were to address them, what's the one piece of advice that you want to provide to the leadership of all these communities as to one thing they need to start tomorrow? What is that one piece of advice that you want to convey to them?
So my advice to the communities, if they haven't done anything, like you're talking about somebody who has like a community that
no, I'm just talking about in general. Like what is one thing that each community needs to start tomorrow? And I know you don't know what each community has or hasn't done, but if you were to address them, all of them, with one piece of advice, what is that piece of advice that they could act upon tomorrow?
My one piece of advice would be raise awareness around mental health in your community and create a truly safe environment for people to come and express their challenges. That's my one advice that I would give them. Like create that safe environment for them to come and be able to, outline what they have, what they are facing. A safe, non-judgmental environment, and by raising awareness around mental illness. That, I think, will trigger, hopefully, with an appropriate leadership.
That's where I wanted to go, Akber.
So community leadership becomes very important. So if you do that, then the leadership should be able to then take that and say, how am I going to create a mental health system, a mental health support system in my community, recognizing that there is a very significant percentage of your community who are silent sufferers, and they're suffering very, very terribly.
And I agree with you, Akber, but I think that even before we get to that stage, you mentioned the key word, and that's leadership, right? Mental well-being impacts your spiritual engagement. And that is what all our communities are based out of. We want people to come to the mosque as much as possible because that shows that at some level that they are spiritually engaged, right? And that is kind of what we kind of measure spiritual engagement. I know.
It doesn't.
I know.
The number of people in your mosque has nothing to do with spiritual engagement. A lot of them come for entertainment.
Absolutely. And so that is the issue. But that is also the issue with mental well-being, is because that is associated with your engagement at a spiritual level. Whether or not you come to mosque or not is irrelevant, right? But it is at some level going to affect your spiritual engagement, and that is your mental well-being, right?
No question.
From a leadership standpoint, do you not think that it is imperative that there be a leadership position in our communities that addresses this specific concern?
So, Mohammad Hussain, you are asking the wrong person about this, because I say that there is no question that there.
But then why is there not?
Because it's too hard, and it's too hard. It's not an easy road to go down. As I said to you, there are barriers of stigma. It's a difficult road to go down, and I think a lot of people in our leadership, unfortunately, focus on, the bricks and mortars, right? I mean, how big your center is going to be, how many people are going to come, who's going to recite, who's not going to recite, and so on. Those are very important things. I'm not saying they are not important. They really are. I'm not saying that you should not have programs that, is hooking people in to come into the center, because that's where it starts. If people are not going to come to your center, then what are you going to do? I'm not saying that.
Yeah, but we're going down that road, right? Where there is no one in our centers.
Exactly.
For a lot of ours, right?
So I think that now, as we are in that situation,
exactly,
we have to have some level of strategy. And it's all about vision. It's all about developing a strategic direction. It's all about saying, you know what? There is a very significant number of my community members that are suffering from mental illness, from mental health issues and mental health challenges, from addictions, from substance abuse, from domestic abuse. What am I doing? What's the system that I have put in place in my community to address these issues in my community? If you haven't had that conversation, my plea to the leadership would be, we need to start having that conversation. That conversation needs to start with the leadership teams, the executive teams, whatever teams we have, that what is our strategy in this area and how are we going to deal with this? I think there are, Mohammed Hassan, I would like to say one thing. I have looked at, from across, my the opportunity sometimes that I have where I recite, lectures across the world. Mm-hmm. I think there are some communities who have taken this seriously. Honestly, I do think they are. There are some communities, and probably the drivers are, healthcare professionals and so on and so forth. But so I think some communities do it, and they're starting to develop these systems, and they're taking it seriously, and they understand it, and they're experiencing it, and they want to do something about it. But I think a lot of our centers have not really taken this on. And I think my plea to them would be, you need to start.
It's a perfect time to start, considering that,
But I also have a specific plea. I have a plea to the ulama as well. And I think the ulama, generally in communities, I think the ulama are great influencers with leadership. They're very good influencers. I know sometimes there are issues in our communities that, leadership may have with an alim and so on and so forth. But outside of that, generally, I think our leadership gets along with the ulama. And the ulama have a very significant influencing role with our leadership. And I really think that if the ulama especially were to come forward and say, let's develop a mental health system, right? Let's understand that there are limitations that I have, around counseling, around dealing with very complex mental issues, mental health issues, and mental illness, and so on and so forth. Let's develop a system together. And if we were to include them as part and parcel of the development of that system, I think you can create a really robust system of support for your community members in your community.
Or even having one ulama to be the face of mental health.
A champion.
Right? Really like an ambassador.
Exactly.
Right? Who has either faced it themselves or has a close family member that have faced it, and really, is going to be able to show extreme passion for that particular area. And I think that's really, having someone who not only can be an influencer from a spirituality perspective when it comes to dealing with this, but really an ambassador for all communities who, whenever you think of mental health in our communities, you think of that particular ulama, right?
Yeah, and I think that it needs to also permeate, right? So I think that there, needs to be something at the level of the Jamaats. I think there needs to be something at a higher level, maybe with the regional federations and what they're doing. and maybe they focus, a lot on education and so on and so forth, and let the care and everything be done, support be done locally. They may have a very important role in research, as an example.
Well, yeah, that's probably right.
And then there is, of course, world bodies that we have that could also be part and parcel of this. I just think that traditionally we have not given this area any importance, and we have a lot of people who, at least in this pandemic, if there is anything that you can say that has come out in this pandemic, one of the things that has been exposed in this pandemic in our communities is the real mental challenges that our community members are having and what they're suffering from. I mean, I'll tell you, I'll always make a plug at the end, because we are going to wrap up soon, but
yes,
I will always make a plug for my seniors,
of course.
And I mean, if I were to tell you what they're going through, where, to them, the center was everything. It was the nucleus, it was the hub, right? It was that area of social gathering and everything. And now kids are not visiting them, grandkids are not visiting them, they are in complete lockdown. If you look at what they are going through and the mental turmoil that they're going through, really, it's sad. It's very sad to see. We can't just, we just can't sit and say everything's fine. We will do Ayam Fatimiyya online, and we will get the best speaker. And alhamdulillah, we got, 2,000 hits, on YouTube, and we've done our job. We haven't, honestly, we haven't. We need to look deep into what the problems are with respect to our community. And
okay, so Akbar, we need to end on a positive, because we started with a negative, and I know this is not the easiest topic to talk about. But okay, so on that note, so I remember pandemic started, everyone went into lockdown, our communities were so good at transitioning, we transitioned to online program, we were so good at pivoting, the youths contacted all the seniors, do you want groceries, do you need me to get you medication? And now it's like we've been in this for 11 months, and like there's no more calls going in, it's just the normal thing. So, for our seniors or for anyone who's, suffering, if there's three things that you could, advise people as to what we can do that's going to be positive, that is going to make a good impact, knowing we can't visit each other at the center, and knowing, we can't really visit them in their homes. What are three things that our seniors need from us that we can, slowly move towards as we're all dealing with, this pandemic fatigue?
I think you can socially connect with the seniors still. I know you may not be able to enter their homes, but I think you can still go to their home and knock on the door and talk to them. And I think that's huge. Okay, I really think that's huge, right? So I think that social connectedness, letting them know that, you know what, I'm looking out for you. You're in my thoughts. I have not forgotten you, right? And I don't mean just family members. I think as a community, if we were to still able to do that, I'm just dropping in to say, hello, how are you? I think we can give them food. I think food is a tremendous uplifter for this for these guys. Not because they can't cook or anything, but I think it's a tremendous uplifting thing, is to just give them food. And there is nothing stopping you from dropping off food at their doorstep in the pandemic, and giving that level of support to them. And I think that I still think we can do more in helping some of our seniors connect to other people, virtually. Some of our seniors still don't have the technology available or the ability to do it because we haven't made it easy for them. But I think the technology has advanced in such a way that it can be made easy for them so that they can connect with other people across the world, not just to listen to a majlis, not just to, do Quran Khani or a dua tawassul or something.
Is there anything else though? Like speaking of that, right? We have like locally Vancouver, we do book club now. We do the regular programs. We do Quran Khatmisha, we do tafsir of Quran, and these are all different ways that we can get together, and I think they love the beginning part of the programs and the end part. We have mandazis with Mithani. I'm hoping the mandazis are air fried in your guys' conversations. But is there anything else that beyond just the regular programming? Because I think we're all sick and tired of the.
I think conversation is important.
Okay.
So, so this is what even Mandazi with Mithani. I have tried very hard to make it a conversation where people are unmuted, and we've cracked some jokes, and it's fun, right? Because somebody is actually unmuted, and you can see you sometimes can hear what's being said in the background, and everybody has a good laugh about it, and that's because, right now when we have organized programs, everybody's unmuted, right? And it becomes a monologue, but it's just giving them, it's giving them an opportunity to just talk with people. I think that, that's the best. If that's the best we can do electronically, is to make it easy for them to just have that conversation. I think that goes a long way. You will be surprised, that if you were to go and visit a senior, and yes, you're not allowed to go inside their house, but you are allowed, if you were to wear a mask and they were to wear a mask, to take them out for a walk. You will be surprised as to how uplifting that is, for a senior to have a young person come to their door and say, hey, listen, we're going out for a walk.
Or for anyone for that matter, right? Who's, let's say, dealing with, depression or anxiety or that social isolation.
Yeah.
Right.
And here's some food, we go out for a walk and we have a little bit of something to eat, and, it takes away about, half an hour to an hour of your time. And, it has a huge impact on that. The people we have done this for, I'll tell you, Muhammad Hussain, they talk about it for weeks to others.
But, I'm just going to take that one step further, right? So the person that you're taking on the walk with, that person feels great. But who's going to feel even better? You.
Yes.
For doing that. There was a study
incredibly gratifying.
Yeah, there was a study that I was reading, and I was actually a girl from UBC, Dr. Elizabeth Dunn, who was a psychologist. She gave everyone $20, and half the group had to take that $20 and spend it on themselves, and the other half had to take the $20 and spend it on somebody else. And then they evaluated how well they felt after that. There's no doubt that people who got to spend money on themselves felt great, but the people who got to spend the money on somebody else felt even better.
100%.
Right?
100%.
So not only is that person that you're going to take the walk out for or give food is going to feel great, but you yourself are going to feel even better than they are.
100%. 100%. And I think that becomes a very important thing. So there are lots of things that we can do, recognizing that people are suffering, and there are many positive things that will come out of it. And I think one of the things that I'm fortunate, sometimes is when I talk to, because I talk to my patients, and and I'm fortunate that I actually am able to talk to patients, and a lot of the patients I have are seniors. Many of them are from our community. One of the things I have done with the senior patients that I have is I always keep a certain amount of time during my visit with my patients for them to just talk. Not about their illness, about something that I would consider myself as being completely irrelevant. But for them, it is the most important thing. So they may come to me with 5 problems, but what they really want to talk to me is about what happened when they were 35 in that event, when they went here and did that, and this is what happened. That's what they want to talk to me about. And they talk about it, and all you have to do is listen. We're not very good listeners, Muhammad Hussein. We are not very good listeners. We're very, we're very quick to judge, to give opinions, and so on and so forth. We are very good fixers. We like to fix, right? We're very good fixers, but we're not very good listeners. I say to our communities that we need to become compassionate leaders, right? We need to develop compassionate leadership within our communities. That is the one quality of leadership we need to have within our community, compassionate leadership, especially during this time of the pandemic.
No, that's a wonderful way to end our conversation, Dr. Mithani. So I really genuinely want to say thank you to you for your time. I know how busy and extremely tight your schedule is, and you do many programs for the communities. And so, not only do you provide them service as a physician, you also provide services, with your variety of your different programs that you offer. So I want to say thank you for that. And once again, thank you for your time. Inshallah, we'll have lots of comments. So hopefully, those who are viewing this this video can provide us with any comments or any feedback. Inshallah, we can do it again, time permitting, and we can keep this ongoing discussion. Inshallah, we can perhaps make it more interactive next time. We can have more seniors involved. But if anyone has any questions, concerns, please do let us know. We'll put an email in the description in our video. So please do let us know. Once again, Dr. Mithani, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Inshallah, have a good evening.
Thanks, Mohammed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.